the Calloway farm did not look like a place that needed help. That was the first thing Dottie Crane noticed when the wagon let her off at the gate. The fences were straight, the barn roof held its shape, and the kitchen garden along the south wall had been recently turned. She had expected ruin, something that looked desperate enough to take her in. She stood at the gate for a long moment, her trunk at her feet, the driver already clicking his horse back toward town. The August heat pressed down without apology. She adjusted the strap of her bag, straightened her spine, and walked up the lane. She had not come because she had somewhere better to go. She had come because this was the last name on the list the Reverend in Moose Jaw had given her, and she had already been turned away by the other two. The man who answered her knock was not what she expected, either. He was taller than the doorframe seemed to want him to be, broad through the shoulders in the way of someone who had never thought much about it. Face darkened by sun and weather past the point of telling what his natural coloring was. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at problems, steadily, without hurry, waiting for them to explain themselves. "Mr. Calloway?" she said. He gave a single nod. "My name is Dottie Crane. I was told you might be in need of a housekeeper. Reverend Halloran in town said you'd written to the church board about it." He studied her a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he stepped back from the door. "You'd better come in." His name was Frank Calloway. She learned very little else about him in the first hour. He showed her the kitchen, the pantry, the room off the back where she would sleep, and the cellar where the preserves from last autumn were stored. Half of what there should have been, she noted, for a farm this size going into a second winter. He told her she would take her meals in the kitchen. He told her his son, a boy of 9 named Kit, would need looking after in the evenings. He told her he was behind on the accounts and she should not touch them. "I can manage accounts," she said. "I know what I said." She did not push it. She was not in a position to push anything. That first evening, she set the table for 2, for Mr. Calloway and for Kit, who came in from the yard smelling of hay and dog, and looked at her with wide, solemn eyes that she found harder to meet than his father's. She ate after they had finished. She took what was left from the pot and sat at the end of the table and did not make any comment about it, because she understood the arrangement. She was the help. She was not a guest. She had been the help before, in other houses, and she knew better than to confuse courtesy for belonging. But she noticed that Mr. Calloway, on his way out through the kitchen, paused at the door. He did not say anything. He went out. She washed the dishes and went to bed. The farm's name was Calloway Creek, and it had been in the family for 22 years. She learned this from Kit, who learned everything from his father and repeated it with the gravity of a child who has absorbed information meant for adults. "My grandfather broke the land," Kit told her one morning, sitting at the kitchen table with his primer open in front of him and his attention on her entirely. "My dad was 14 when they came out from Ontario. He says you don't own land by signing a paper. You own it by working it." "That's probably true," Dottie said. "Do you own land?" "No. Did you used to?" She was quiet for a moment, turning the bread dough on the floured board. "My husband did, before he passed." Kit considered this. "Is that why you're here?" "That's why I'm here." He turned back to his primer. He was a reasonable child, she thought. He did not ask more than what was necessary. She supposed he had learned that from his father, too. She had been a widow for 14 months. She did not talk about it, except in the simplest terms. Husband, passed. Land gone to the bank. Because the longer version required a kind of emotional honesty she did not have the energy for in a stranger's house. Her husband, Martin Crane, had been a good man who died badly of a lung fever that moved faster than anyone expected. The farm in Manitoba had gone to service the mortgage. His family had not offered to help. Her own family was 3 cousins in Nova Scotia she had not seen in 11 years. The Reverend in Moose Jaw had been a kindness she had not earned, and did not know how to repay except by finding her own footing as quickly as possible. She had been good at managing a house. She had been good at managing accounts. She intended to be useful here, even if usefulness was all she had to offer. By the end of the second week, she had a fair picture of the situation at Calloway Creek. The farm itself was productive, more productive than the seller suggested. The cattle were healthy, the grain yield for the season had been decent, and Mr. Calloway was a rigorous worker who was up before light and did not stop until the light failed. But the books were a disaster. Not from laziness, from something worse. She found them when she was cleaning the office, a small, cold room off the front hall that appeared not to have been properly sorted in 2 years. Mr. Calloway had said not to touch the accounts. He had said nothing about cleaning. She cleaned. She did not mean to read the ledger. But it was open on the desk, and she had the kind of mind that could not help absorbing figures the way other people absorbed faces. She stood there with a cloth in her hand and read 2 pages before she understood what she was looking at. The numbers did not add up, not in the ordinary way of sloppy bookkeeping. She had seen that, and it had a certain random quality to it, errors scattered like dropped pins. This was different. These errors had a shape, a consistent, deliberate shape that moved grain receipts from one column to another, that undercounted cattle sold at Moose Jaw in the autumn, that recorded payments to a supplier in swift current that she was quite certain did not correspond to any goods received. She checked the pantry figures against the supplier invoices. She checked the invoice totals against the bank receipts. Someone had been stealing from Calloway Creek for at least 2 years. She closed the ledger. She went back to cleaning. She did not say anything at supper, but she lay awake that night, trying to calculate the total. She couldn't manage it precisely in her head. She needed the ledger back in her hands. But her rough estimate, even being conservative, was somewhere between $400 and $600. In a decade, that was the difference between a farm that could withstand a bad season and a farm that couldn't. She thought about who might have done it. The only person with Riley's access to the accounts, according to Kit's innocent commentary, had been a man named Mr. Dent, a farm manager who had left in the spring, suddenly, citing a family matter in Regina. Mr. Calloway had not replaced him. He was managing everything himself now, in addition to the physical work of the farm, which explained the state of the books and the shadows under his eyes. It also meant he might not have noticed yet. Or he had noticed. And the weight of it was something he was carrying without letting on. She understood that impulse. She had carried things without letting on for most of her life. She sat with the knowledge for 4 days. On the 5th day, she went to the office again. She told herself she was returning to clean the window. The east-facing window had a mineral deposit on the lower pane that bothered her. She cleaned the window. Then she sat down at the desk, opened the ledger, and spent 2 hours going through it from the beginning. She had a good memory for figures. She had always had a good memory for figures, which had made her useful to her husband, and invisible to everyone who thought that a woman, who kept a clean house, was not also keeping track of everything that moved through it. By the time she finished, her estimate had sharpened, $470, minimum. Perhaps more, depending on how the cattle weights had been recorded at the Swift Current auction 2 years prior. She closed the ledger. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Then she took out a sheet of paper from the drawer and began to write out the discrepancies in her own hand, one by one, clearly and without editorializing. Not an accusation, a record. The kind of document that could go before a banker or a magistrate if it came to that. She was halfway through when she heard the door. Mr. Calloway stood in the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the ledger. He looked at the sheet of paper in front of her. She did not flinch. She met his eyes and waited. "I told you not to touch the accounts," he said. "You told me not to manage them," she said. "I'm not managing them. I'm reading them. And what I'm reading concerns me, Mr. Calloway." He was quiet for a long moment. She could not tell what he was thinking. She was learning that this was simply his nature. He moved through his thoughts the way he moved through his work, without announcement. "How much?" he said finally. "At least $470, possibly closer to $520, depending on the auction records from the autumn before last. I'd need those documents to be certain." He leaned against the doorframe. He did not look angry. He looked like a man who had suspected something and was hearing it confirmed, and had prepared himself for it, and was finding that preparation was not the same as being ready. "I knew something was wrong," he said. "I didn't know the number. Do you want the number?" "I want the document you're writing." She finished it. She did not hurry, and she did not slow down either. She wrote it out in the same hand she had used to balance Martin's accounts for 6 years, clear and precise, with page references from the ledger, so he could check every claim himself. She set it on the desk in front of him when she was done. He read it without sitting down. He read it the way he did most things, all the way through, without stopping, before he responded. "This is thorough," he said. "I used to keep accounts for my husband's farm," she said. "I know what clean books look like." He set the paper down. He looked out the window for a moment, at the yard, at the tree line, at whatever a man looks at when he is making up his mind about something. "I'd like you to go through the last 3 years," he said. "Everything. Set it right. That's more than a few evenings' work." "I know." She waited to see if he would say more. He didn't. She understood that to be the arrangement. She would do it. It would take as long as it took, and he would not insult either of them by pretending it was small. "All right," she said. She worked on the accounts in the evenings, after Kit was in bed. Mr. Calloway worked in the office too, sometimes, at the other end of the desk, going over correspondence or checking the next day's tasks against the feed inventory. They did not talk much, but she found she did not mind the company of a person who did not feel obligated to fill silence. She found other things in the ledger. Small acts of ordinary bookkeeping left undone, not from malice, just from a man who was better at cattle than at columns, managing a loan through a difficult spring. She set those right as well, without comment. It was not difficult work. It was the kind of work she had been doing in one form or another since she was 18 years old, and she was 27 now, and she was quite good at it. Kit started sitting with her in the evenings while she worked, doing his school lessons at his end of the kitchen table. He was a child who did not require entertainment, only presence, and she could give him that without disrupting her own concentration. They worked in parallel, and sometimes he asked her about arithmetic, and she showed him without making him feel he should already know. She was not trying to win anyone over. She was not trying to become indispensable. She was doing what she could do, as well as she could do it, because there was nothing else she knew how to be. It was 6 weeks into her time at Calloway Creek when she found the last of the outstanding debt. She had gone through everything by that point. All 3 years, forward and back, cross-referenced against the bank statements, Mr. Calloway had retrieved from Moose Jaw. The final damage was $483, and she was almost certain she could prove enough of it to bring before the magistrate if Mr. Calloway chose to pursue it. She left the completed document on the desk with a clean summary on the first page. She did not make a ceremony of it. She just left it there and went to start supper. Mr. Calloway found it after she had put Kit to bed. She was in the kitchen when he came through. She heard him go into the office. She heard, after a while, the particular quiet of a person sitting still with something significant in his hands. She put the kettle on. He came into the kitchen eventually. He stood at the far end of the table. She poured 2 cups of tea without asking, and set one at his end, and sat down at hers. He sat. He turned the summary page over in his hands, though he had clearly already read it. "You went back to the cattle weights," he said. "I thought you'd want certainty. I do." He set the page down. He picked up the tea. "I owe you more than a housekeeper's wage for this." "It's the same work," she said, "just applied but differently." He looked at her then, really looked, the way he rarely did. He had a habit of looking just past a person, at the work to be done or the horizon to be checked. This was different. "You've been doing accounts since before you came here," he said. It was not quite a question. "My husband's farm. 6 years, you're good at it. I know." He was quiet. He turned the teacup slowly in his hands. Outside, the September wind had begun to come down from the north, finding the gaps in the old siding, and the lamp on the table threw a circle of yellow light between them. "I have a standing offer from the grain co-op in Moose Jaw," he said. "They've been after me for 2 years to consolidate the accounts for 3 neighboring farms. I've turned them down, because I didn't have anyone I trusted to manage it." She waited. "It would be a formal arrangement," he said. "A salary, not a household wage, separate from your position here, if you wanted to keep that, or instead of it." He paused. "I'd take a share for brokering the introduction, but the income would be yours." She looked at him for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" He seemed to think about that genuinely, as though the answer was not already in hand. "Because you earned it," he said, "and because it would be a waste not to." She thought about Martin, and the farm in Manitoba, and the 3 cousins in Nova Scotia, and the Reverend in Moose Jaw with his list of names. She thought about standing at this gate 6 weeks ago, adjusting the strap of her bag, telling herself that if she could just be useful enough, she might find a way to stay on her feet. She had not thought beyond that. She had been trying to survive, and surviving had taken all of her attention. "You'd need to think it through," she said, because she did not entirely trust what she was feeling. "I've thought it through," he said. "Have you?" She looked at the lamp, at the circle of light, at the tea cooling in her hands. "Give me until morning," she said. He nodded. He did not push. He finished his tea and set the cup in the basin, and went out through the back hall. And she heard his footsteps cross the yard toward the barn, because there was always something that needed checking before he slept. She sat there for a long time after. The farm was different in October. The harvest was done, the cattle moved to the winter pasture, and the mornings had the quality of held breath that came just before the first hard frost. She had decided, the morning after the tea, and she had told him plainly, yes. She would manage the accounts for the 3 farms. She would keep the house at Calloway Creek. The arrangements were set down in a letter to the co-op, signed by Mr. Calloway and witnessed by the Reverend in town. She did not make anything of it. There was work to do. But the house felt different, not because anything visible had changed. She was still sleeping in the room off the back, still cooking in the kitchen, still sitting with Kit in the evenings while he worked through his primer. But the quality of her presence had changed, she thought. Or perhaps her understanding of it had. She was not waiting to be let go. She was not managing the careful business of being temporary. She was working. She was building something. And the difference between those 2 things was larger than she had known how to put into words, until she was on the other side of it. It was Kit who said it plainly, the way children do. He was at the table one evening in late October, his exercise book open, his pencil in hand, and he looked up from his work with the expression that meant he had been thinking something over for a while. "Are you going to stay?" he said. "I think so," she said. "My dad thinks so too," he said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who had overheard more than he was meant to. She looked up from the ledger. "He said to Amos last week that this was the first time in 2 years the accounts made sense," Kit continued, turning back to his exercise book, "and that a farm without good accounts is a farm already failing, and that he didn't intend to fail." She was quiet for a moment. "And that was all he said?" she asked. Kit considered. "He said he should have done something about the books sooner, but that some things you don't know to value until you see what the absence of them costs." She set her pen down. She looked out the dark window at the yard, at the shapes of the barn and the fence and the old spruce that marked the corner of the property. Frank Calloway was not a man who said things easily. She had learned that by now. He said by doing them. By leaving a lamp lit in the hall when she worked late, by putting her name on the co-op letter without her asking, by replacing the latch on her window before the cold came down. Without comment, one day, while she was in town with Kit, she had not told him what any of it meant to her. She had not known how to say it without sounding like she was asking for something. Maybe that was the thing about two people who had both learned to manage on their own. It took longer to recognize that you didn't have to. The first snow came in the second week of November. She woke before dawn and lay still, listening to the quality of silence outside, the particular muffled quiet that meant something had changed in the night. She dressed and went to the kitchen and lit the stove and stood at the window, watching the snow come down, slow and steady, onto the yard. She heard him come in from the barn. He stopped in the doorway to knock the snow from his boots, and she poured a cup of coffee without turning around and set it on the corner of the counter, where he could reach it. She heard him cross the kitchen. She heard him pick up the cup. For a moment they stood like that, he with his back to the wall, she with her hands around her own cup at the window, watching the snow cover the yard. "Looks like it'll hold," he said. "Yes," she said. "Cattle are settled. We'll be all right." "I know," she said. "I checked the feed inventory last night. You have more than enough." She heard something that was not quite a sound, more of a shift in the quality of his silence. "I noticed," he said. She looked out at the snow. The spruce at the corner of the property had its branches weighted white. The fence posts had white caps. The yard looked like something that had been set in order and covered over for safekeeping. "My husband used to say that a farm in winter is a farm at rest," she said. That you could tell how a farm had been managed by what it looked like in November, whether it was resting or whether it was exhausted. "Which is this one?" he said. She turned then finally and looked at him. He was leaning against the wall with his coffee, his coat still on, watching her with the steady attentiveness she had come to recognize as his version of care. "Resting," she said. Something moved in his face. Not a smile exactly. The lines around it were too weathered for that to come easily, but something in the region of relief. "Good," he said. She turned back to the window. The snow was still coming down. The farm was quiet. The stove at her back gave off a steady warmth. Outside, Kit would be up soon, tumbling out of bed to see the snow. The co-op accounts were waiting in the office, 3 sets of ledgers in various states of disorder, and she would sit down to them after breakfast and work through them the way she worked through everything, carefully, methodically, without making a great event of it. But for now the kitchen was warm, and the snow was falling. And there was coffee in her hands, and the man at her back was someone she trusted, And trust, she had learned, was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the largest thing she had been given in a long time.